Chris Brown, Steve Tasker with you, and we welcome in ESPN NFL analyst Dan Orlovsky, whose appearances on One Bills Live are presented by Caesars Sportsbook, an official mobile sports betting partner of the Buffalo Bills. And Dan is going to be part of your Week 18 coverage as part of ESPN's doubleheader Saturday. He's got the Panthers-Bucs game for all the marbles in the NFC South with his trusty compatriots Chris Fowler, Louis Riddick, Katie George, Peter Schrager, as they're going to have wall-to-wall coverage of that doozy. Man, there are some unbelievable matchups here in Week 18, and some are all or nothing like that one.
Yeah, we were really excited when we got news. Gosh, it was probably around 11:30 p.m. on Sunday night, kind of after Sunday Night Football had settled, that we had gotten that game. We have gotten Week 18 games over the past, I think, 4 or 5 years now for our crew, and they've been meaningful. That our game has to have impact or meaning in when it comes to playoff ramifications, but oftentimes it's a seeding thing. This is our first ever of a winner wins the division and goes to the playoff and loser goes home type of experience. And so, when we got word, we were stoked. Obviously, Troy and Joe getting Seattle, San Francisco is obviously great for ESPN as well. But yeah, that's we're stoked to have that one. And a team in Tampa that was as hot as anybody first half of the season and has really struggled lately. And Carolina has some really impressive wins and then has some really head-scratching losses, almost by the alternation each week. So it'll be fun.
Yeah, not for nothing, because I know it's all about me, right? I'm glad it's going on Saturday because now you get a game on Saturday. You can kick back. Week's done. You can totally throw yourself into the Sunday slate and the later game that night, Seahawks 49ers. Really sets up for a fun weekend for watchers. But effectively, Dan, this is a playoff game. I mean, it's a playoff game. You win it, you advance. You don't, you're done. And it's all there is to it. What are your thoughts about how it's going to go?
Yeah, it's a huge deal. It's really exciting. I think in our game with Carolina, it's really still a developmental year for Carolina. That was the goal. They've been rebuilding these things ever really since Dan Morgan, their GM, and kind of has taken over, and Dave Canales is their head coach. And so, okay, where are they? They've absolutely checked the goal of developing and infusing talent into the organization. Now they got the chance to win the division and get into the playoffs, which is just cherry on top. And so I think that the way that they're playing defensively, and I've said this a couple times, if you watched that game last week and obviously Carolina and Seattle play, it's a 10-3 ball game with 20 minutes to go. It becomes 27-10, but it's 10-3. So it's a one-play game for the great majority of that game. And this is a team in Seattle that everyone's saying legitimate, rightfully so, Super Bowl contender. I really like Carolina's defense. McMillan for them has been outstanding. Tampa has just been so decimated by injuries on offense. Their offensive line has been in flux, all of that stuff. So they're now healthy up front. Baker's beat up, but he's a gunslinger. They've got their perimeter players all healthy and back. The defense has been the issue for Tampa. They've just been very uncharacteristic under Todd Bowles, giving up big plays in the run and the pass. And so, they're reeling. I think if Tampa plays their best game, they're probably the more talented football team. But I wouldn't be surprised if Carolina rides their defense to a win.
Yeah. Let's get to Bills-Eagles from this past weekend. And the two biggest takeaways for me were the Bills might have finally found a field stretcher for their passing game, and their defense may be peaking at the right time, despite the fact that the cavalry hasn't even rode in yet. There's the potential for Ed Oliver to return in the postseason, and maybe one or two other players. But I guess my question to you, Dan, is how can the field-stretching exploits of Brandon Cooks and putting that on film this past week help them going forward against future opponents and keeping them honest?
I think that's a big deal. And they don't need 2 of those, 3 of those a game. If they can get 1 of them a game, it's huge. But putting it on tape is a big deal because everybody has been, and rightfully said, this team can't stretch the field vertically. I've been on this show with you guys talking about it's great, the tight ends and the backs, but it's still just a horizontal stretch. Now and I think one, he's put it on tape, but two, it's also his reputation. Everyone knows Cooks has been a very successful player for years in the NFL now. And so you have to, he's got the reputation, the cachet, and I'm not telling everybody he's Odell Beckham from his heyday, but it's still now defensively, teams will have to say, hey, when Cooks is on the field, we got to make sure we stay on top, because if we're not, they will throw him the ball down the field. So I do think that just creates some more space. We also haven't seen, a healthy Kincaid or a somewhat impactful Kincaid and Cooks really on the field that much. And so I think that's another element to this offense that I'm intrigued about and excited about. And so I think Cooks being healthy and having the ability to at least stretch the field once a game, twice a game is really meaningful. I agree with you, Chris, on the defensive perspective. I said this Monday morning. I love where the defense is. I love it. I think this run defense is much improved to where it was the start of the season. I've talked about this for a couple weeks now. These young defensive linemen are coming on. Milano played well once again. The backers are playing at a good level. The coverage is fantastic. I think this defense, to your point, is peaking. And I think a lot of people are going to say, well, you just don't want to face a really good run game. I kind of see it differently. I think that if this defense is going to get had, it's going to be by an highly effective, very much so clicking on-point passing game. Because if it's not, you won't have success throwing the football against them.
Yeah, and you mentioned this defense, and certainly they showed against the Philly offense. I mean, they had Saquon, who was the offensive player of the year last year. They're the defending world champions, and they held him without a completion in the second half, which is unbelievable. How do they pull that out more consistently? That second half performance. We've seen it off and on this entire year, right? Where they've had a great second half of a game or made some adjustments. How do they do that more consistently? And why is it so maddening when they come out and then the Patriots snap off like two huge runs against them, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think it's just hopefully figuring out what the offense's plan or how they're trying to attack you is sooner. I think one of the things that you realized in that game was Philly wanted to throw the ball in early downs, and they wanted to get into their play action pass game in early downs. And so you saw a lot of what I would call like two-man in the second half in those situations. They're playing like really man-to-man underneath with two deep safeties or press quarters, press forward. So they're kind of playing pass-centric defenses on earlier downs. And so I think that's helped them. It's also, they've played a little bit in the run game, Steve, like they've played much more downhill in the run game in the second half rather than reactionary or catch in the run game. And so I think it's just getting to that a little bit sooner. I think the playoffs help that. You're going to have so much more of a finite focus. You guys know in the season, it's week to week to week to week to week. And oh my gosh, and you're trying to take care of everything, where in the playoffs, it becomes so hyper-focused. Steve, you know this far greater than I. So hyper-focused and so game plan specific and centric. And so I think that's going to bode well.
What do you make of how varied and voluminous the blitz packages have been in recent weeks for this Bills defense? Because they're not just spinning the dial. They're using stuff that, we haven't seen all season. I'm wondering how deep this book is. But like Dorian Williams, for example, he comes wrapping around and absolutely cleans Fred Johnson's clock on a play. I haven't seen that play all season, but maybe that and the deployment of linebackers as their primary speed rushers here in recent weeks.
Yeah, one, it's really smart because those fire zones and or simulated pressures, you're not exposing coverage. Two, you're allowing speed to get on edges for those offensive linemen or against offensive linemen. And I don't know if it's Bobby Babbitt's bag, if that's necessarily his past, or if it's McDermott tapping into his past from Philly with Johnson and whatnot. And so it's awesome. I got some notes. Just a ridiculous fire zone. So like there's some really good pressure packages going on right now. And I think that's something that, if you look at teams in the AFC and the teams that you're likely going to have to be playing against, the Chargers have struggled with that this year. The Jags have struggled with that this year. Houston's been better with it, but Houston struggled big time last week against it. And so Yeah, this is something that I think has become, it's really interesting because it's a very much so 180 turn to what this team was defensively like 2 or 3 years ago. We saw this, and I know we talked about it a little bit last year, that this is what they started to turn up to more and more. I think that they're turning it up even more so as you get into this final game and into the playoffs. And I think it's going to be a calling card of their defense. If they're able to go on a run, that blitz package is going to be, and it puts speed. And it's hard for offenses, Chris. It just is, because it's a who's who in the zoo type of thing is what we call it. Who's the blitzer? Who's the dropper? And it's not, I could know you're the blitzer. Who do I want blocking that blitzer? Because good blitzing linebackers are really difficult to deal with. Do I have a back that I really trust can block them? Or do I have to waste an offensive lineman on them? Great. If you're going to waste an offensive lineman on them, then your back's going to have to block a defensive lineman. And so that's why those packages are really difficult to handle.
So we know that going into the playoffs, we kind of feel like in Buffalo, you kind of got the best player in the group, right? I mean, Josh is going to be as good as any quarterback they're going to. Even the way Trevor Lawrence is playing, Josh when he's on and feeling good, I mean, he's as good as anybody, and probably going to give the Bills an edge at that spot. But if you're talking about giving him an extra thing, like this Brandon Cooks thing, going deep, if they've got this added dimension to their offense, who's going to benefit more? Is it Josh, or is it a guy like Kincaid, or maybe James Cook benefits the most because now a defense has to think about this offense a little differently? What other offensive player is going to get something out of this boost that maybe a Brandon Cooks in this deep game might give the Bills offense?
Yeah, the number one name that comes out to me would be Dalton Kincaid. He doesn't need it. I think he's a really big matchup. We've talked about that, and I've been adamant about it. If they got Kincaid, they're going to be okay. I'd also say Shakir, just because of less people down near the football, a little bit more yards after the catch in those situations. I was shocked to see them not run the football more effectively. I want to credit Philly for the way that their plan was and filling on the backside and stuff. But I would say Kincaid, just because, I mean, Steve, I don't know if you've heard me say this. I often talk about offensive football in an accordion. And if you don't have vertical speed to stretch that accordion out, I was talking about it a little bit last night on our broadcast, it's shrunk, right? So there's less space to work in for those intermediate players. You got a player like Cooks that can at least lift some coverage, impact the deepest part of the field. You're just creating a bigger secondary window for those guys that are those secondary type of receivers to eat in. So I think Kincaid, but I would tell you this, I think there's a great benefit. If Cooks is able to have that type of, at least a sliver of that impact, I think there's a great benefit for everybody, because margins, plays in the playoffs. One play loses you a game. One big explosive play can lose you a game. And defensive coaches will obsess over that. And I think that if he's able to provide that, it's going to be beneficial for everyone.
Looks like based on who is going to be in lineups for teams in Week 18 and who will not, there's a good chance Denver gets the 1 seed and beats the Chargers without Herbert playing. And they obviously have something to play for. They want to win and catch the 1 seed and get a bye week, which would leave New England presumably as the 2, assuming they beat Miami at home. Jacksonville probably the 3. And with Chargers lost, the Bills with a win over the Jets would move up to 6 and presumably go to Jacksonville. You mentioned they're a hot team. They've won 7 in a row. But, Dan, we've often seen like teams with long winning streaks. It's very hard to sustain that going into the postseason and win an 8th in a row, a 9th in a row, a 10th in a row. Some people actually see Buffalo's loss this past week as a little bit of a blessing, because you get to, Steve's putting his hand up, because you get to kind of reset the deck and everything. I'm not saying Jacksonville can't win an 8th game in a row this week and then a 9th in a row in the postseason, but is there something to be said for that, sustaining that level of play? Because as Steve says all the time, in the playoffs, you got to play well on that day, no matter who you're playing.
Yep. Yeah, it's the way I look at the Rams loss in Atlanta last night as well. These guys are human beings. Buffalo, I don't care what any player says, and I'm not trying to knock them. They know that winning this past weekend really didn't help them that much after New England winning. Like it wasn't going to. you're banking on New England losing. I think the same with the Rams. Like the Rams really were no longer in the division race. So it's like, okay, are we really going to kill ourselves for seeding and whatnot and avoid, if you want to go win a Super Bowl, you're gonna have to play a good team and beat a good team, right? And so, yeah, I think it's really hard to win for a really long period of time. I think that we see teams have a game or two blip in December that we know are really good teams, and they don't maybe play their best football. Maybe they're not necessarily fully engaged. Maybe not, they're totally locked in. Maybe there's a fraction of a disinterest. They're coming off of a holiday weekend, all that stuff. I do think that is a reality. Jacksonville is a really, really, really good football team. They're really well coached. Trevor Lawrence is as confident as any quarterback in the NFL right now. Their 3 wide receivers are playing at a very high level. Their tight end Strange is a really good pass catching threat. They don't run the football very effectively, so I would tell you that I mentioned before how good the coverage is in Buffalo. It'd be a really fun matchup to watch that coverage unit versus that pass game. This defense in Jacksonville takes the football away as well. So, yeah, I just think it's a long season. And for teams that finally get into the playoffs, but no longer division and number one is not really a viable option, I do think that it's just like, all right, take a deep breath. We got a long road ahead of us, and there's still, if you're going to be one of those couple final teams, 4 or 5 weeks left.
Yeah. And how, Dan, the Bills, Brownie and I are conjecturing that Josh may take a snap, walk to the sidelines the way he did in week 17 or 18 2 years ago. Right. James Cook, same thing. I know these guys have incentives and stuff, but there's no price you can put on these guys showing up next week in the wild card round, fresh and healthy. Your thoughts around the league? You got a Denver team that's gone for the 1 seed, and then if they win, they get a week off anyway completely. So there's a lot to be said for the way these teams are going to handle this in the end, particularly an AFC bracket that, with the exception of the AFC North, it's all set. How knotted up do you get over the 5, 6, or 7 seed and seeding like that?
I think health matters more than seeding. I think if you're a legitimate team and you're, as a coaching staff, you can take a step back and say, can we win it? Can we realistically win it? I know there's going to be 14 teams in the playoffs. Nobody believes that there's 14 teams that can actually win the Super Bowl. If we can realistically win it, our health is way more important than a seeding or avoiding somebody or catching somebody. It's the playoffs. Anybody can beat anybody on any given day. So trying to sit here and avoid this team, catch that team sounds great. Like everyone was talking about it with the NFC South. Like, oh man, you want to be the 5 seed so you can play the NFC South winner. I mean, the Seahawks lost to the Buccaneers. The Rams lost to the Panthers. Those are the NFC South contenders. So I think health. I think if you're a team that legitimately believes you can win, rest your guys, get them fresh, and you got a really big 3-week stretch.
Dan, thanks as always. Have fun on the broadcast Saturday. We'll be watching.
Thanks, guys.